I sat down with astrologer Alexandra Rose to discuss the upcoming eclipses, the Mars-Rahu conjunction, the nakshatras, and this time of spiritual transformation. Okay, everyone, I'm here with a special guest today named Alexandra Rose. I met Alex years ago at Astrology conference, and she started studying with me. She's been studying with me a couple years and really taken it to another level with her own practice, and she helps me with classes, and she's got a great YouTube channel and whatnot, and wanted to have her on to talk about the current transits and other stuff. Alex, how you doing? Just saw you one that long ago.
I know. Hi. I'm doing really well. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and we just saw each other last weekend. I'm recording this on June 14th, and we just spent the weekend in Ojai studying Vedic astrology and Ayurveda. So, you know, fantastic retreat. And Alex has been doing all kinds of, she studies Vedic astrology, but with other kinds of healing and other kinds of things that she's going to talk about in a minute. But I'm going to have a link below to her YouTube channel and other things so people can really investigate her work. But the reason I wanted to have her on the channel is because she also has, she also does a lot of updates and whatnot. So, Alex, I wanted to start with just, telling us how you got started with astrology and tell, the people watching, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I would say, from a young age, I really was interested in the planets and interested in the signs. And I remember that my father had an astrology book, a Western astrology book, and I would read it. I would go through and I memorized all the signs and the planets and all these things, and had an interest in that, generally speaking. And then I would say starting in high school, when we started to explore other religions, other spiritualities, I really got into Hinduism and was really inspired by Shiva and Kali, really mainly. And so I had this astrology and I had this love for Hinduism kind of blended together. And I didn't even know that there was Vedic astrology out there. And I would say that in 2013, I left Connecticut, where I was from, and started living at an ashram in Grass Valley, California. And one of the things that got done for all of the people there that were offering their services was to get their Vedic chart read. So I didn't know anything, but I went and got my Vedic astrology chart read. And I remember thinking when I left, wow, that's me. What I had thought was me was not me. And so I decided, and it included the gods from the Hinduism. So I started being open to that. And I think that was in July, and then in September of the following year, July of the following year, there was a Vedic astrology conference at Shivananda Ashram in Grass Valley. And I remember knowing I'm going to find my teacher there. And so I went and I listened to all the different teachers. And then when you had gone up on stage and talked about whatever it was you were talking about, I said, I'm going to study with him. And then I approached you afterwards. I bought your book, The Ascendants, the 12 Ascendants. And then you said you were starting an astrology course in September, which was a couple months later. So I got on the course, and what I had already known about astrology kind of synthesized with what I was learning, and it went from there. And probably 2 years in, people started asking me to look at their charts. And you had advised, once we went through the second course, that the best way to learn was to start reading charts.
Yeah.
So I did. And all of a sudden it blossomed into a practice.
Yeah, you're definitely one of the few that actually take all of that and actually listen. People listen and say, no, you're very well trained. Get out there and do it, and just start sharing, and then you'll start to unlock your own inner genius. With my courses, I just give you a very strong structure so you understand how it's working, and then your intuition takes over. That's the best thing about those Vedic astrological texts and the way they're organized, is they're a platform for your own natural intelligence and intuition to then function. I actually wanted to ask, because I didn't know this, Had you lived at the Shivananda ashram before? Was it at that ashram or was it another one? Was it at Integral or which one was it?
It was a small ashram at the time called Pleasant Valley Sanctuary, which was based off of Ananda, which is another place there.
Yeah, off the Ananda ashram. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. So it had been a year before that you were at an ashram, got your chart read, and then when we met, you had already had lived in an ashram for a while, and yeah. Yeah, so that's fantastic the way you really took the teachings and actually applied it, and once you start doing readings and start actually, especially if it's based on good information, slowly by and by you start realizing, oh, I know what I'm saying, and you get the feedback, and you also don't go beyond what you're capable of and all of that. So this is the problem that beginners make, is then they often go too far and they make mistakes. And then you get the feedback and you think, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. That's why I always told you guys, don't go beyond what you know. What you know is so much, and that's going to help people so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then it reinforces the good experience. Again, this is also just real quick how the karma sort of corrects itself, because sometimes students will start and they'll go too far. And they'll mess things up, and then they'll get this feedback that they don't know what they're doing, and then they stop. That's how the karma sort of corrects itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's great. So now, so you also have, well, I was also wondering, just in a general sense, I like to ask people these questions. How would you say that astrology's really improved your life? Like, it's kind of general, but it's also, what would you say to that answer?
Yeah, it's a good
to that question.
So I think that the astrology, the way I understand it, is that it illuminates your potential, really. It shows what your skills are and also what your shortcomings are. And it's not a fixed thing. It's not like, here's your chart, sorry for your bad luck or whatever. It's like, this is who you are, and this is how we can work to bring awareness to your potential and your qualities so that you can really rise above it. Because I think ultimately, the chart is a blueprint to your freedom, because it shows where you can bring awareness to yourself. And then ideally you can kind of evolve past what's holding you back. But you can't change anything until you become aware of something. So I think that the astrology is a good starting point to at least get to know yourself. And then the deeper you go into it, the more you can understand yourself and then grow. And I think also, one of the things I love most about the readings and for my own life is the dasha shifts, the timing shifts, because it allows you to understand what is happening in your life. And then when you can understand what is, then you can work with you can know what you're working with, and then kind of surrender to it and really get the best out of it from moment to moment, and then know how long it'll last. Like for instance, I see in my own life, I just had a Dharma planet get activated. And now it's like all of these very dharmic, purposeful situations are arising in my life. I better take them because my Dharma got activated, and not that it won't last, but it'll shift. And so take what comes and then go with it like that. It makes it easier to kind of align with life, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Yeah. And the great thing about it, and again, you've learned very specifically to recognize, the planet that I just went into a dasha cycle where these Dharma planets are activated. One of the things that can happen then is that you can trust that this is where this is leading you right now. Because we get all kinds of things placed before us. And as you know, as someone who does readings now, people will be on the cusp of something and they're not sure. Is this just one of my weird sort of interests? One of these things that I kind of waste my time on? Or is this something that's actually really important? Like, let's say something like astrology. Is this just some kind of passing fancy where I'm going to try this course or try this thing and it's just going to peter out? Or is this really something significant? As an astrologer, we can look and see, yeah, you just started the dasha cycle of the planet ruling this Dharma house. And again, we can tell the person, look, I can see that this thing that just started that you're thinking of doing is very much connected to your, like, you've always loved this thing, and you can give voice to what Dharma actually is. First, you got to learn what it is. Then you explain that to the person. So this is something that you've probably always really loved, right? Yes. You've just been waiting for a teacher or something to show up to teach it, right? Yes. Well, there you go. And you see right when that cycle starts. So watching your own chart, this is again what I tell students like yourself, and again, you really took it on, is to start watching your own life as well. Don't try to psychoanalyze yourself, because sometimes that's really not very objective. But notice things that show up in your life, and like how these things actually work, what Dharma actually is. Oh yeah, this was a great opportunity when this thing showed up.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Yeah. And so you've seen those things really shift in your life as well, by this, by learning the specifics of that.
Yeah.
And also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I've been able to embrace it. Yeah. And grow with it and get to know what's going on.
Yeah. And the thing you mentioned is also very important. You know, it's really funny. It's not, so then astrology is not something like, oh, well, here's your karma. Good luck. Just pray to God, you know, and the chart itself is what we're working with, as you said.
Right.
And so the thing that's creating the difficulty is also the thing that creates the solution. And they're the same thing. One is not one, there's not the good and bad. It's all just a range.
Yeah, exactly.
So in your practice, do you specialize? Because I know you've done a lot with, it's very interesting with the medicine, the plant medicines and the healing. And do you specialize in your practice, or how have you found that astrology's worked in conjunction with other sort of healing modalities that you've embraced? Because again, I always tell people this about studying Vedic astrology especially, is that it enhances really anything that you're doing, just because you know yourself better, but also any healing practices that you are involved in. If you're doing any kind of yoga or Veda, any kind of healing modality, Vedic astrology just plugs it all into some system.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's similar to like a religious or spiritual aspect, where there's different ways to the same means, you know, the same mean of oneness, the same mean of God, or whatever your word is for that. It's all, there's different ways to get there. And so I think astrology is just another way, another tool in the spiritual toolbox to get to your freedom, to get to your deepening awareness. And I've found that it really weaves into the same work that I do with different spiritual teachers and different Toltec-based teachings, really where we're trying to disassemble the illusion of separation, and really figure out what keeps us away from our knowing that we are life, that we are aligned with everything. And so the astrology is, again, that blueprint, that map that we can use to get deeper into ourselves, get to know ourselves, and really evolve in that way. Mm-hmm. Just like everything else that I do. And I see the way that it weaves in with the work that brings awareness. That's really the key, is that we gain awareness first and foremost of ourselves. And that we remember that we are one with everything. And so when we tune in with that flow, then everything kind of just, it makes sense, whether it's good or bad, it makes deeper sense in our awareness.
Yeah. And it also, as we say, astrology is that timing, the very crucial timing, because even just on a very literal scientific level, we have to remember that it's really, that's the unique component of astrology, is it's the timing. Mm-hmm. Which, yeah. You know, other disciplines have a quality that teach us something, but that crucial element of timing is what astrology can bring into the mix.
Yeah, and I think it's really magical, because the teachings that I work with, aside from astrology, really teach us that when we accept what is, then we can be one with the flow of life. And so the astrology is this really beautiful, I feel like I have a secret map, you know, that shows the timing. And we have to be careful not to play God, because everything's on life's timing. But it's like, even if you don't know your astrology, it's like people that come to me who are on a spiritual path of awakening, they know already. It's like they get the shit before it even happens. And so it's like, I feel like it is in alignment with other teachings, in the sense that there is a flow of life, and astrology really, because it has that map of timing, can just tune you in with it. So in case you don't just naturally get it, you have a tool to kind of help you understand. Yeah,
and you can see how, again, all these things start to line up. You can see that the people who are more aligned with Dharma and their purpose anyway, everything they say lines up with what astrology already says.
Right.
And the people that aren't, you can already see that everything they're asking, you can see the tension and the stress of what they're hoping or wanting, and how it's not lining up with the lesson that's coming, and how the planet that is trying to force some reality is that dasha is there, and that your whole job is to try to really explain that thing, what some would call free will. You know, I often say free will isn't free often. It's usually the ego.
Yeah.
When someone is free, they're usually not functioning through their will.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because the will is often us trying to assert something that's not so easy.
Right.
And so, well, that's great. And do you specialize in your practice at all, like relationships or career or just spiritual counseling or any kind of things like that in your you know, your reading practice, or just general?
So I would say that I open it up to general questions so that people can come with whatever. I do offer relationship readings specifically for that. And then a lot of people just individually, of course, are curious about relationships. So we talk about those things. I would say, though, that I ultimately focus on the, I'll say, spiritual aspect of the chart, where we can bring awareness to ourselves and grow as a human being, I would say. So not so much about body and Ayurveda. I don't necessarily include those things because I don't have as much awareness on those. But I do think, because it's all interrelated, that when we draw awareness to one aspect, it can definitely shift all of the other aspects.
Yeah.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what about these, let's get to some stuff now. What about these crazy, all these transits? What's going on with that? What do you think's happening? I have the chart here, especially right now. We got all of this. This is the chart literally of like today. We see the Saturn and Ketu exact pretty much, and then Mars, Rahu almost exact.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, you know, I think one of the things is that I do work with the equinoxes and solstices, and the idea of kind of that evolution of the seasons. And I think that it's interesting that we're about to get to the summer solstice, which is kind of the peak of the sun, the peak of the light. And I do think that we're really going through, I would call it a purification portal, where it's really a lot of our stuff is getting brought to the surface, especially with this eclipse also coming. And I'm seeing that it's like a lot of people are kind of, if they're really tuning in, especially with these malefic energies, or these energies that are bringing up kind of our deeper wounding, or our aggressions, or our anxieties, and all these different things, that a lot of people are kind of getting pushed, especially with that Mars Rahu, to kind of find the courage, to find the discipline, to kind of push through it and get to the other side. But it's taking a lot of personal responsibility, and it's taking a lot of discipline. It's taking a lot of honesty that people really have to find. And also that shifting of perspective, because if we get stuck in the Saturn, Ketu, Mars, Rahu perspective, it could certainly be bringing up a lot of issues for people, a lot of angers, a lot of unresolved issues, a lot of karmic stuff that's kind of heavy. And if instead we're tuning our perspective into, how can I grow from this? How can I shed a little bit of skin? I think that there's a lot of potential for growth. I always see that people grow the most through these harder transits, because it kind of forces us to do something different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we, you know, last weekend when we were together in, up there in Ojai, I brought up the chart, you know, on the second morning, I think, and said, this is why it's a good time to really come together at these difficult times. You know, this is, it's a good thing to do, is to get together and like study and learn, again, because you have these planets in this Gemini Sagittarius axis, which to me also, that's the, you know, one of the big, you know, gifts of these times, especially as all that energy concentrated in Gemini, especially now that Mercury is also gone there, the ruler is there. And to really see the truth, see and in a very specific way, like get the facts straight.
Yeah, definitely.
Not just the external facts, like how things literally work or what literally and actually is going on, besides our kind of triggered beliefs, which is what Saturn Ketu would be about. where we just kind of believe things, but we don't really understand how they work. So there's that literal level, and we see it in the world with all the disclosures and all that stuff and seeing the truth of what people are saying. But then with ourself, our own honesty and our own inner dialogue, especially with Mercury there now, to really introspect and say, you know, sort of develop beyond our own spiritual bypassing, because we're all full of spiritual bypassing. We're all, you know, you hear me say it a lot, and you know, but we all think we're spiritual. When you say, oh yeah, spirituality, spiritual, everybody thinks that's what they are on some level, and we are, because that's certainly part of our nature. We're all spiritual because we come from spirit. But what's meant by spirituality is very different than what most people do, because spirituality are really practices. You meditate, you do this, and then you evolve consciousness beyond your preconceptions and your programming. And that is very different than what most people do.
Yeah. And I think that that's important, you know, what you're saying, because it's like, yeah, everybody wants the spirituality, everybody wants whatever that term means to different people. But there's a lot of humbling that takes place. It's like how many times, what makes the difference between the student and the master is how many times the master has surrendered. And this is really kind of that thing of, okay, are you willing to take the lessons? Are you willing to integrate it? And I think that idea of introspection is also really important, because I was noticing, you know, there's so much of that masculine with the Gemini and the Sagittarius, these masculine signs, and Mars and Saturn and the nodes. And it's like, let's counterbalance that by listening, by going internal, by not needing to take action on everything that we're experiencing right now, but ingest it, you know, and kind of bring in the feminine aspect within all of us that is a little bit more receptive, that's listening, and that Mercury in Gemini too, that's able to kind of decipher what's really going on here, so that we're not so tricked by everything and making all of these different, taking action, you know, with the Mars Rahu being aggressive, the Saturn Ketu feeling really heavy, feeling the pressure. Let's just sit with it and let's integrate it and really grow from it.
And often, you know, the catalyst for that kind of change, it's a dialogue and interplay between Jupiter and Mercury, because Jupiter is those beliefs that we need to get. We all have a belief, and those beliefs sort of anchor our life. And Mercury is opposite that, always questioning and bringing this kind of skepticism a little bit about how much we're just blindly following and how much we actually know. So often the catalyst for that transformation is Mercury questioning and saying, but this is wrong, this is insincere, especially with Gemini, which is always trying to gather new information and figure things out. And so Mercury is often the catalyst which understands and recognizes that we need to do something different.
Yeah.
But then in this case, and in often, or in fact in every case, eventually the thing we need to do different is surrender, relax, and do something that's feminine, and realize that that's the part that's out of whack. And this is how Mercury is that neutral planet, which can go either way. And Gemini is that masculine and feminine. It's very dual. So these dual signs, particularly this interplay between Mercury and Jupiter as well, is how we fix that spiritual bypassing, because spiritual bypassing is also very Jupiterian, especially Sagittarian. So having those two malefics in Sagittarius shows how that spiritual bypassing, paying the price for that, where these things we just blindly believe in just stops working when Ketu and Saturn are going, especially in the nakshatra here. You have anything, and you know, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, you know, to talk as well, because you wrote that long article, or no, you had that live thing on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, wow, she's really she's dialed into this. So I want to have her on to talk about it. But do you see any of the facets of the nakshatras or anything like that as well?
Well, yes. I think that having it be in Purvashadas, but the Saturn Ketu end, you know, again, that theme of purification and that theme of really kind of getting through to it's the first kind of, that's like a victory area where we're kind of getting kind of that reboot up to kind of the reawakening. And so there's a lot of that pressure, a lot of that kind of, again, what you spoke of in your video and what I reiterated in mine about the humbling or the humiliation. It's like, stop resisting life, stop resisting and really get down to what's really happening here. And this also depends, of course, on each person's individual sign, because I'm seeing it different. I'm seeing a lot of Pisces that are having work issues because it's their 10th house, you know, and I'm seeing a lot myself as a Cancer where I'm having to really work really hard right now and kind of let all of my resistance go and focus on the truth of what's happening and kind of put all of my attention there. I think Ketu and Saturn being planets of focus, being in this particular star of so much, or asterism rather, of so much potential to kind of plant new seeds and kind of figure out what we're watering, what we're working with, gives us the potential to really focus, you know, and get clear. And again, that kind of spiritual bypass, it's like if you are just up in your head trying to bypass all the things that are happening, Ketu and Saturn won't let you. And so you can keep resisting, or you can get nitty gritty, get to the lesson and really focus, you know. And then again with the Mars Rahu on the other side in Punarvasu, you know, this is the star of it can be like, I see people in it where, especially in Gemini, where they're kind of wandering, they're forgetting to kind of stop and smell the roses. And this can really, and it's the star of the return of the light, you know, it's the star of really rejuvenation and also anchoring ourselves into the heart. And so we can use this energy to also see what's coming up mentally right now with it being in Mars Rahu. What are your mental stories? What's pulling you away from remembering that it's all within? And so that we can really use this time to rejuvenate ourselves, purify ourselves.
Yeah, that's really well said. And you pulled out the important things that I also have been focusing on with these two nakshatras, especially Purvashada, that it's really that sort of devotional quality of Sagittarius more than anything, and where it can be that sort of blind faith. And blind faith is great because, you know, we all have a certain amount of blind faith. Whatever we believe in, we're sort of faithfully blind or blindly faithful to it to some extent. You know, the symbol is the winnowing basket as well, which shows that we need more discrimination. But the deity is Apis, the god of ocean and that sort of devotional nature. So that's the power, but then you get the two planets there and it reveals the potential weakness, the two malefics, which shows how we might be watering these seeds that aren't truthful. And again, most of them aren't truthful. They're mixed with some truth, but until we're enlightened, the seeds we've planted are not total. This is what karma is. We've incarnated in the world, and only a pure soul is totally pure.
Right.
So we always have to understand everything is a range. And so any pressure around these nakshatras and whatnot is going to show the impurities of the things that we're believing. There's always a level of immaturity to it. So now it's just time to really address that. And we're seeing the pressure of that. That's the lesson, is to really look at that with playfulness, curiosity, discrimination, not a lot of drama, not a lot of fear. And then the Punarvasu is also, as you say, it's the return of the light. It also comes after Ardra, where there's the great flood and the deluge and the intensity, which is where we're going to have the eclipse. We'll get to that in a minute. But the after that deluge and that flood, there's the beautiful sky and the air is pure and clear and clean. And as you pointed out, you know, one of the great symbols of Punarvasu is where knowledge, which is Gemini, or at least you know, data and information, then becomes anchored in the heart. Because, you know, in accordance with Vedic astrology, which of course is 100% sidereal, it's all nailed into the sidereal sky. The first three padas of Punarvasu is in Gemini, and then the last pada is in Cancer. So this nakshatra is literally where the information gathering and intelligence of Gemini becomes anchored in the heart and must drop down from the head into the heart and be integrated. Because Cancer is the sign of integration. It's where, again, everything kind of descends this way. and all the playfulness and curiosity of Gemini, which is that third body part as well, that sort of neck, hands, playfulness, experimenting, trying new things. We got to come down from that into the heart, where all information becomes integrated. And so that need to drop down from the head as well is a big part of this nakshatra of Punarvasu. So even though we're, let's say, challenging our, bypassing or whatnot, it's not just staying up in our head, making us all vata and crazy as well. Mm-hmm. Eventually it has to drop down into the heart. That's what Punarvasu is about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I like what you said about the devotion too, of the Purvashada, like rechecking in what we're devoted to, and seeing where we've invested our faith in these lies, especially the way I work, in the stories of our mind, these things that aren't true. And all of a sudden it's like we're getting the opportunity to grow spiritually and get to see our lives called out and see that we can disinvest our faith in the things that, in the karmic stories and patterning that's not serving us, and also it's like, if a lot of anger, if a lot of things are coming up right now, great, because it really is that time of kind of just moving out of the flash flood. The eclipse is still coming to bring more of it, to see, okay, what's my perspective on a situation? What have I invested my faith in? And where do I have to shift so that I can grow? It's all really, it's beautiful, in my opinion, what's going on. And
it's also very interesting to flip it on its head, because we all think, oh, what am I devoted to? Like we're devoted to good things. Again, devotion is it's a neutral term. Most people aren't really devoted to things that are so good. We're devoted to our failure. We're devoted to our unhappiness. You see how people just keep I'm devoted to my failure story. I'm devoted to how badly I was treated. I'm not giving it up. Don't try to take that away from people who are really devoted to it, and you'll see when it comes back.
Right. Totally.
That's also devotion. And by the way, that's also a part of this. That's also how these qualities are multifaceted. Because when in our heart we think that's what's going on, then we get a whole kind of worldview and a whole kind of belief system, which is Sagittarius, that's based on that. And then we find a teacher who supports this. This is why people find teachers that play into that kind of stuff, that play into that dark story that we're devoted to. And this is why, even in the negative sense, I talk about this sometimes, that it's not just God, it's also even exploited and very bad beliefs like, the white supremacy or fanaticism. Those people know how to indoctrinate people into that belief. You prey on people who have this dark worldview, that they're already devoted to this worldview because of the way they were treated, and you exploit that. And you indoctrinate them into this dark belief about otherism, right?
Yes, exactly.
So those beliefs are deeply embedded, for sure, and now's the time to really look through them. So anything else you want to say about that, or you want to talk about the actual eclipse that's coming up?
Well, I think the eclipse is certainly tied into it, because it's really like kind of and I think people are already starting to feel it, the shaking, kind of like the moment of the apex of kind of the climax of what's kind of coming, where really I think it's a really auspicious, good time to be even talking about it as it's coming up, because it's giving people the opportunity to check in and say, wait, what am I devoted to? And I think as you're speaking of the teachings that I work with, we say similar, the addiction to stories, the addiction to our suffering, the addiction to being sad or whatever it is. We get addicted to it, and then we find people or teachers, in Sagittarius speaking, to reinforce our stories. So really it's kind of this, and then we have the Gemini side to say, wait, let me think about this. Let me navigate, because really it's like maybe our whole life is built around us having people reinforce our stories.
Right.
And all of a sudden we see that, this is a belief system that's completely untrue, and we have to give ourselves compassion in the unraveling, but really be willing to let the unraveling happen, which I think is part of what the eclipse is kind of bringing, if people are open to that.
Yeah, and it's very easy to think something like addiction, which is kind of a sort of negatively charged word, and devotion, which is a positively charged word, don't really have to do with each other, but they're really on some level, you know, addiction winds up having a connotation of something where there's a substance or something external. Right. But again, and a devotion is something internal. And of course, they're on a different part of the spectrum, but they really sort of both have a very similar theme. Particularly when you flip devotion and you really take, especially mental patterns, and saying that, you know, we're addicted to our drama and we're also devoted to it, especially when you think of them both as psychological structures.
Yeah, exactly.
They're almost exactly the same thing. Because we keep it going on, and it's often hard for us to address these kinds of things because we want to feel like, frankly, we want to feel like a victim on some level. We want to justify it, and we can always justify feeling addicted to our pain and whatnot, because all of us were mistreated. All of us had something bad. Some of us much worse than others, for example, but also some who had it much worse also healed as well. When you start to look at these things objectively, it all kind of levels out. And so to just see these things objectively, that's really the Gemini point of view. And a lot of it revolves around things like playfulness and not taking things so seriously and not being so, again, just fired up about well, I'm justified in feeling. This is all kind of the negative Sagittarius energy, you know, is justifying our, you know, pain or our, you know, addiction or, you know, attachment to that story.
Yeah, and where Gemini can really let us be honest with it. And I think that yes, there is a devotion and addiction are similar if we're talking about what we're, you know, in our mind. But
right,
I think
in our mind.
True devotion, it has nothing to do with our addictions, our patterning, our suffering. True devotion is to something greater, which is ultimately what Sagittarius is leading us to Pisces. You know, this idea of letting go of all of that, all the stories, all the attachments, and being devoted to life, which really is not good nor bad. It's a greater force.
It's surrender. Yeah, the big thing with Pisces is surrender. But how do we get there? It's very easy to surrender to a drug. Well, I can surrender with this pill. All right, that's good enough.
Right. Yeah. Sagittarius seems like it's kind of the starting point of, okay, let me get clear about real devotion so that then as I take this journey onward, I can go through the next steps, knowing that I'm aligned with life and taking things as they come rather than having the stories continue to play out, the false stories that keep us stuck, really.
And so we can see right now as we're recording this, if we run this forward, we're very close to another lunation cycle. So these things start to gather momentum as we get near the lunation cycles, and in particular because we're going to have a full moon here, and then the next lunation will be the eclipse.
Yeah, will
be the solar eclipse. Then the next full moon will be the lunar eclipse. It's also called Guru Purnima, which is very transformative. So we're really right in that sort of eclipse vortex right now. We're also, as we're recording this, the sun is about to move into sidereal Gemini. Mm-hmm. So we're recording this right on the cusp of that. So just you run this forward. This is we'll have the full moon here on, it's on Sunday into Monday. Actually, it's the actual Purnima is Monday, but then we go forward and you see the sun is up here, the moon comes around, and then we have, you know, Mars and Mercury leave, but then we have the eclipse on the 2nd. You see, like right there in Ardra. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, Ardra is Shiva, Rudra, you know, as the destroyer, the star of the storms. And so I think that we're leading up to this kind of pivotal boom, you know, where it's like there's so much force to just get rid of it. And really, you know, not like get rid of it, it'll never come back, but kind of call it like it is, you know, to ourselves. In the work I do, it's like you call yourself out and really have that moment where you get to destroy what no longer serves you, because you've had enough time leading up to really get clear on, okay, this has got to go. And I think the force of this destruction, you know, has that quality. Also, with the full moon coming up on Monday is in Mula, ruled by Kali, which is also very destructive. So this time can be very destructive, but destructive of bad patterning. And I think a lot of us need that. We need that kind of really forceful, get it out of here. And that can, so this buildup has the momentum to really push us, get us to have the courage to just tear it up at the roots and change direction. If that's what we want. And I think we have to be careful too, because if there are people that are not aligned with that, it's going to have a lot of stirring. They're going to externalize that energy, not use it for self-reflection. And it can be a very tumultuous, time, because a lot of aggression and a lot of projections can also happen. People can redirect that energy outward, which is kind of the opposite of what we always say on the path, and a lot of people not on paths of growth could certainly be externalizing it. So we have to be careful, and also use those projections for our own growth. Everything can be used for our own awareness and growing, so we can see our response as well to what's happening around us. So that's why if we are on a path of growth, really using this time to call ourselves out, to get clear with ourselves, to choose a path of courage and discipline, so that no matter what's going on around us, we can really utilize the fourth to just keep going, and let it kind of fall away.
And Ardra, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that often happens is we, of course, one of the big mistakes we make is we externalize things. We see ourselves as this body and of this world, when we're actually of the other world. We're actually in this world of the other. And so we don't have a very solid relationship with the other world, so to speak, with our silent and still and peaceful nature that's always there. When these intense moments happen, they very much concentrate our willfulness, and those who have a discipline and who are used to not looking externally for their salvation or their strength and power get more empowered.
Yes.
Because first of all, we don't feel like engaging as much anymore. That's what happens, especially that Saturn Ketu right now is creating a lot of aversion to even wanting to do a lot externally, like wanting to engage with people or engage with. And so again, that can lead us to depression and sadness if we don't have any relationship with our true spiritual self, which is not of this world. Then we just feel the emotion of it. Why don't I want to get it? Why do I feel this? Why do I feel this? Why am I so disappointed? And it's an emotional thing, and we get stuck there.
Yeah.
Similar to like with the Ardra energy, that nature of Shiva is to destroy weakness, is to destroy our false attachment. And also with Kali, which is the deity of the full moon, right down here. The deity of the full moon on Monday is Mula. So this Mula Ardra axis is where you have Kali on one end and Shiva on the other. And they're both about the transformation of time and consciousness and form. And this is also where the plane of the galaxy runs. This is where the galactic plane runs. Literally, when we're looking back at the full moon on Monday and we see the bright moon in the sky, you're looking back toward the center of the galaxy, the galactic core, the bulge in the galaxy. That's where it is. And by the way, this is universal. We talked about this last week. It's universal to the Mayan, Toltec, Aztec. All their cosmology as well was universal to the plane of the galaxy, what they called the dark rift. What they call the dark rift, we call the plane of the galaxy. So this is where Ardra and Mula exist. This is why you have these two destructive forces in Indian cosmology. In Mayan, Toltec, Aztec, I would imagine. I do know that it's in Mayan, they call it the dark rift. Same section, because this is where the destruction occurs. But in the Shiva end, on the Rudra end, up here, this is when we see when we have that eclipse, we're looking away from the center of the galaxy, directly away. And so again, this is where we transform everything in this world toward that higher, like crown chakra merging with the highest after destroying the attachment. That's why Shiva as Rudra is also, like we talked about last weekend, Pashupati, which which is the lord of the animals, but also the one who destroys the animals, but also the one that destroys us. He's the lord of the hunt, but he's not just hunting those animals, he's hunting us. He's hunting our physical body, because eventually he's going to hunt us and liberate us, just like he liberates the animals.
Yeah,
that quality of Shiva as Ardra is really powerful. What were you saying?
That in that story as well, of the story of Rudra, you know, when he went and had his kind of destructive episode after his grief, really it came from grief that his first wife threw herself in the fire, you know, and then he got righteous and he kind of destroyed everything in his path. So these qualities are happening. It's like, okay, our grief is coming up, and then our righteousness in our grief is going to come up. And then after is when he cried. It's also the howler, you know, a lot of those tears. And then we move into Punarvasu of the purification of the return of the light. And so I think it's also important to recognize that it's okay to have the grief. It's okay to have the things come up, but not to get sucked back into you know, what's holding us down, to let it move through you, and to really not be destructive if you can help it, to try to turn the destruction inwards so we can get rid of the patterns that are holding us back. But to also, you know, be okay with the fact that it's not easy to transform, that there's grief involved, that there's a letting go, that there's a detachment to a lot of things that if you invested your faith in a belief system for however long, just to realize that it's causing you pain, you're going to grieve it, you know, and that's perfectly okay. All of this is kind of, it's a stirring up and it's a letting go. And I think it's important that people remember to let themselves have the grieving of what was, and to know that this is all part of it, but it's moving you towards a more pure and true way of being. And so that Rudra is intense, and it brings up a lot of stuff with it. And I think that I think it's important to remember too, to have, permission, giving yourself permission to grieve and to move through what you have to move through, but to keep going forward with discipline and courage, because the light, the purification, the return of the light is the next star.
Yeah.
It's almost guaranteed, you know, if you let it happen, that you'll be okay. You know, you just got to let it move.
That's actually what I meant to start. I actually meant to start talking about that quality of Shiva as Rudra, the flood of tears, and the flood of that sort of purging. It's very much like a sort of purging of intense suffering and pain once you're and shattering illusions, and then how destructive that can be, how transformative that can be. And you pointed out the great point about that Shiva story, where when he was immersed in the emotional pain, you know, the story of where he wasn't honored at the yajna, at the fire ceremony, and then his wife Sati went, you know, angry and upset, and then when they saw that that they were laughing at Shiva, she threw herself on the fire. Then Shiva found out about it and became furious. So when the emotion of this nakshatra is that fury to want to then destroy everything, and to destroy because of that emotion. So when we're stuck in the emotion of this nakshatra, it can be very destructive. Yeah. And again, when we're in the higher level, I kind of got on the higher level of Rudra, which is the destructive, but it's actually destructive for the spiritual level. This is why he's also the lord of the animals who's hunting us. And but yeah, that whole range of intensity that comes through Ardra. This is why you also see floods. And, you know, on a mundane level, I'm sorry to say, I think there could be definitely some catastrophic flooding and things like that could happen as we get closer to the eclipse. Mm-hmm. So I pray for that. I hope we don't have a lot of devastating, you know, natural events, especially the potential for flooding is really high as we get near this, especially day before or the day of. This transition from Mrigashira into Ardra is a very destructive one in general. In 9/11, the planes hit the building right as the moon was going into Mrigashira, and then the building started to fall in Ardra as the moon went into Ardra. The tsunami in 2004 was that way as well. So this transition from Mrigashira into Ardra, about 6 degrees Gemini, or once the moon goes into Gemini, 3 to 4 degrees, especially it starts to get close, and then around 6 Gemini, when it starts to go into Ardra, is a very volatile time in general, particularly if you start getting eclipses and nodes there. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But again, it's mirroring the external, you know, the internal with the external.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anything else you'd like to add or discuss about this? It's happening on my birthday, so wish me luck. You think I'll make it?
Yes.
I'll be your typical client. So I'll be your typical client. What am I going to do this year? This eclipse is happening on my birthday. Do you have anything to say about that? The great question we always get. Anything significant? That's always the question. Anything significant about it happening on my birthday this year?
Well, you know, being in Gemini, I just had a reading this morning, and I reminded someone that the mind loves to pretend like it knows what's going to happen next. And so even as an astrologer, it's best to just kind of explain the energies, but not necessarily even try to play God as an astrologer and get the mind all worked up. But I think that it's, it's going to be transformative, especially for you as a Gemini. Really could shed some skin, let go of move into a new stage for yourself.
Yeah. And the thing that would be said too, as well, is it's, you know, the real thing about eclipses, and again, we kind of seize on the date, which one of the things I always do is I kind of try to untangle the cycle from the date. And I do this with all lunations, because, you know, as someone who's been watching the full moons and new moons, their cycles, the days they happen are important because they set in motion and energy. Like the day of the eclipse, that's the moment, because that's actually when it's going to be happening. And of course, they're very important moments while they're happening, but they're really significant of the cycle. And the reason the eclipse cycle is so important is because it's actually revealing the node at that time. But the node went there, you know, but this node, this Rahu, entered Gemini March 23rd. So the person who is the Gemini, let's say, even though the eclipse is happening on the birth date and they're going to focus the concentration on that day, and, you know, because that's what we hear and that's the date.
Yeah.
You kind of uncouple that date from the cycle that, well, since March, you've been going through this. It's already a time of shedding skin and transformation. It's going to be doing that for the next year and a half. But this date, yes, in particular, there's going to be that date and, you know, like a couple days before, but especially at that time is really a time to tune in to blah, blah, blah. So you can certainly, you sort of narrow things down and start with the larger cycle, because the reason it's important is because of the cycle of Rahu through Gemini for that entire time. Then the date concentrates. It's just sort of a coincidence, you know, it's not that important, but you know, it kind of is. It's pretty trippy. You got to be careful when you get that eclipse right on your solar return, because it is the sun that's getting eclipsed.
Yeah. And, you know, I would say, now that you're saying it, that I also like eclipses, because I think that they reveal the subconscious to us. It's kind of the nodes, these Rahu Ketu, that are carrying such deep karmic patterning from things of our childhood, from things that our spirit is really wanting to learn in this life. And I think a lot of times they're hidden from view. And then all of a sudden, when they kind of pop out, or there are these tendencies that we have that we don't necessarily put enough awareness on, because it's so polarized. And all of a sudden, it's like the sun and the moon are there, and it's like it comes illuminated. And so it can also be, a really good time for our subconscious to come out, and for us to kind of just know that too. You know, that there's a lot of kind of heighten, the frequency seems to heighten a little bit, because the nodes have that very otherworldly energy to them. And so the frequency gets heightened, our subconscious kind of becomes illuminated. And again, that's why it's such a beautiful time for growth. And it's really, and yes, it's like this whole year and a half, it's this Rahu Ketu cycle, where whatever planets we have there, or the houses that they are, there's a lot of subconscious unraveling that can happen. And so when we have an event like an eclipse, then it comes to the surface. I think that's why you're saying, you know, with 9/11 or with the floods, it's like our subconscious is getting kind of projected out, and the intensity of what's going on is for us to see. It's like it's right in front of us.
Right. Yeah. Just be clear, they didn't happen on eclipses. They happened as the moon went from Mrigashira into Ardra. But especially with 9/11, Rahu was also there, but just that transit from Mrigashira into Ardra. But the thing about and what you pointed out is absolutely the case. The reason the eclipses are so powerful, those moments, is because that's when the node actually reveals itself. As I said, because the nodes are these energetic vibrational points between the orbits of the sun, moon, and earth, which are the three facets of our incarnation: the power of the sun, the feeling of the moon, and the samskaras. on the physical earth. So these are the three bodies that also relate to body, mind, and spirit: body, earth; mind, moon; and spirit, sun. So these three facets, these three important planets, are the three that have produced the form. That's why we have forms: sun, moon, and earth. Power of the sun, energetic, principle of the moon circling the earth, and then the earth. So the harmonic convergence of those three bodies on the ecliptic is what the node is what the two nodes are, and they're always there. And again, sometimes people think, well, the nodes aren't real anyway, that it's not really a thing unless we have an eclipse. No, that point is always there, just like a magnetic field is always there, or something else is always there. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it isn't there, obviously. Right. Sometimes the most powerful things are the ones that are unseen. But the importance of the node itself, or I'm sorry, the importance of the eclipse times is those are the moments when they completely and totally converge for these brief periods of time, and then that shadow that's cast on incarnation is revealed. And it's a very powerful metaphor when you think of it like that, because we've been compelled to incarnate in this world that we're so fascinated by and hypnotized by all of these unseen karmic forces, and this convergence of sun, moon, and earth, and all of these energetic factors that we never see. And so for a few hours a year, literally, we see it. It comes out. The shadow passes over. And as you so eloquently said, this is a time for us to really experience those shadowy forces. And so, this is why it's best to, spiritual practices and sadhana and any kind of meditation and really dialing in and connecting to that is extremely powerful then, because all those energies are converging. But it's also where we see these explosive and unpredictable things happen. And they happen on our soul level as well. It's just whether we're tuned into it or not.
Exactly.
Okay, so good. Well, look, it's been great talking to you, Alix, and I wanted to know and want you to let people know how they can, get a hold of you and get readings. Of course, I'll have a link to your YouTube channel, but other than that, what else would you like to say?
So I have a website, which is alexandrarose.com, and maybe I'll post it too in the video or underneath. And that's really the best way to contact me. All the information is there, and I offer basic readings, relationship readings, moon readings, where we just focus directly on your emotional body and on the moon, how it affects you. And then I do transits, where I do have, most people will come back to me every 6 months or so and do follow-ups. And in about a year or so, I'm going to start offering spiritual counseling sessions as well. So we can do the basic reading. And then if you want to keep working with me on the tendencies that we talked about, we'll go there and do that more regularly, because there's one thing to have awareness, but the next thing is you need to keep plugging in and keep doing the work to really make the change happen. It's not an overnight thing. Even the eclipse, it's like, okay, a burst in our awareness, but then let's keep the momentum, let's keep the discipline going. So I'm here to start people on that journey for now. And the best thing to do is to tune into my website, and also Alexandra Rose Vedic Astrology on Facebook.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So I'll link all that there. There'll be the link to your YouTube channel so you can get your updates. People, should subscribe and get her updates. As you just heard, she's, Alix does a fantastic job explaining these things. And at the website, is there anything about the other kind of work as well that you're doing, or?
No, pretty much
just about the astrology.
Yeah, and once the spiritual counseling becomes something that I feel ready to offer, it'll be on the website as well.
Yeah, that's fine. So that and the Facebook, and it's been so it's been great to have this time with you, and I'm sure people are going to really benefit a lot from this, and we'll do it again.
Sounds great.